Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is James. Welcome back to the Soundline. Today I'm very pleased and excited to be talking to you guys about Monitor Audio's brand new, top of the line, no holds barred, reference level hi-fi speaker, the Hyphn. The first thing to talk about, probably the thing that people notice most, is the shape and the material that the cabinet is built out of. Each of these two cabinets is, and they are two completely separate cabinets, is made out of a acrylic mineral composite. No wood whatsoever. It's a very mechanically inert material. It does not vibrate or resonate at all. You can basically balance a screw upside down on its head on one of these cabinets with the bass thumping and it will not tip over. These speakers do not vibrate at all. It's really cool how they've done it. So these cabinets are 106 kilograms each. They are really quite heavy, not the sort of thing you want to walk around a lot. We actually have them on sliding pucks at the moment that allow us to reposition and slide them on this carpet with relative ease. But then once we have them in a good working position where they're sounding good in this room, we tend to take those cups out. So talking about the drivers, that's probably actually a more logical place to start, because when Monitor Audio was designing these speakers, that's the order in which they did it. They designed the drivers first and then figured out exactly how they wanted to arrange them. And then once they had them arranged in their 3D software, they designed the cabinet and the housing that was going to allow them to do that last. There are 4 8-inch bass drivers mounted in opposing fashion in each of these two cabinets, so 2 on this side, 2 on this side, facing each other. Nothing necessarily groundbreaking about that configuration, but it is a less common but proven method to still get a lot of bass out of a system without putting any energy into the cabinet. So the idea is that if you've got these 2 bass drivers here and these 2 below facing each other, they're compressing in sync with one another. That means you're still providing heaps of bass pressure into the room coming out of this whole area here, so you're still hearing and feeling the bass. But the kinetic energy that would normally be shunted into the cabinet in the reverse direction of that driver is cancelled out by the fact that there's one opposing it moving in the opposite direction. So if we have the bass pounding in here, I can come over here, put my hand on the speaker and not feel a thing. I theorize that I could potentially balance a pin on its head on here and it wouldn't fall over. The cabinets themselves are ported. They are both individually down ported and tuned to a specific frequency that works well with the bass driver configuration that is in each of the cabinets. The only thing that actually holds these 2 cabinets together is this 8-inch bass driver array. The bass drivers are mounted on struts that go between them, and then the cabinets themselves are bolted to the drivers via great big bolts that go through the outer sides into the backs of the drivers. So this whole arrangement here, which we'll get to in a second, this is not doing anything structurally. So moving on to this section here, this whole arrangement that you see here with the mid-range and the transducer, Monitor Audio has dubbed this the M array. The reason it is called an array is because there are 6 2-inch mid-range drivers in here surrounding an MPD3 tweeter, micro-pleated diaphragm. The advantage of having these 6 2-inch mid-range drivers is that you can cover a really wide bandwidth. Obviously a really small little 2-inch mid-range is going to be able to go to really high mid frequencies without breakup really cleanly. But by having 6 of them, they all work together to create lots of low mid-range energy. And so you're able to overall have a really wide bandwidth. So now all being arranged around the tweeter like this, again, it leads into that point source audio philosophy. The reason that they did the 6 individual 2 inches around the tweeter versus the 1 large cone around the tweeter, according to Monitor Audio, when you do it that way, there is the chance for the tweeter to act as a waveguide for the mid-range and ultimately affect that in a negative way. But by doing it in this arrangement, where the mid-ranges and tweeter are perfectly flush with one another, it results in much less deformation between the frequency bands, and so they all work together and blend nicer. The other advantage of having all of the mid-ranges and tweeter completely flushed like this is it means you know that they are perfectly in phase with one another. There is no chance that the mid-ranges are slightly ahead or behind the treble. Usually that has to be corrected via some sort of electronics in the crossover to make the mid-range and treble be technically aligned with one another or in phase. But by simply having the speakers on the exact same plane, in the exact same vicinity as each other, within reason, there is no correction that has to be done, because this tweeter in this mid-range and this tweeter in this mid-range, they're all going to be perfectly in phase with each other without any correction having to be done. And that's really important. So the idea that Monitor Audio were following here is something called point source audio. The idea behind point source audio is that all of the sound you hear coming from the speaker comes from one smaller confined area, rather than a large surface area like what is most common with speakers, where you have a tweeter, mid-range and bass drivers below that, covering a wide surface area. With these style of speakers, all the sound, including the bass, comes from this one sort of square. The idea behind it is it's meant to mimic a real life instrument, where if you were listening to a guitar, all of the notes, including the high frequencies and the low frequencies, come from one small area coming straight out of the actual instrument. That's the idea behind it. Okay, so getting away from some of the more technical and objective aspects of the speaker into the more subjective and tricky to define areas, I'm going to talk about how they sound. Just as a preface, I think with these speakers being as high-end as they are, when talking about how they sound, I should also inform you of what we're using to drive them. So we're using pretty much all Accuphase gear. We've got an Accuphase P7500 power amplifier here, which is roughly 300 watts per channel, 300 to 400 watts. To be honest, these speakers could even potentially do with a bit more than that. I think they're rated for anywhere between 400 to 1200 watts continuous per speaker. So you do need to have a big grunty amplifier to get these guys moving. So we're using that power amplifier. We've got an Accuphase preamplifier, the C2300, and a DP570 SACD player, which is kind of our go-to SACD player that we use for most of our listening. So when talking about the sound of these speakers, something this high-end, you don't want to mischaracterize them or not feel like you can do them justice, but it is really quite hard to define the sound of a speaker this good. With a lesser speaker, it would be easy to say, you know, they've got good bass, they're really natural sounding, really fast, and that's often all people really need for a good speaker to decide to buy something. With these, I can say that, but it's not going to do it the same justice. So I think probably what I should talk about is how these speakers sound in reference to what I do know. The two brands that we sell here at Soundline are Monitor Audio and Sonus Faber. Now, I love Sonus Faber. They are a beautiful sounding speaker that you can listen to for hours, and I think that's part of their signature. They have a really lovely, relaxed, laid back, and I might even say recessed soundstage that allows you to listen to them for long periods of time without fatigue. That's just the soundstage that I like, that I'm used to. These are a far more forward sounding speaker than the Sonus Fabers. Doesn't mean that they're bad, or that these are bad or those are bad, it's just a different style. And I think in the high-end speaker game, these are actually, the sound of these would actually be more common than what Sonus Faber have. So when we first hooked these up, after they'd had maybe 30 or 40 hours of playback on them on a relatively low power amplifier, I didn't like them at all. They were in my face and aggressive and, dare I say it, a wee bit harsh. My colleagues were telling me, oh James, you just haven't listened to enough high-end speakers. That's how all high-end speakers sound. Then we ran them in on the P7500 for a couple of days, just on a burn-in track. And boy, did they get better. They are now so smooth and rich sounding. My favorite part about them, and this is just me, like other people will disagree and have their own favorite things. My favorite part about these is the bass. These are rated in their spec sheets to go down to 18 Hertz, and you can definitely hear that. The bass from these speakers is it goes lower than anything I've ever heard before, and it's linear. It doesn't roll off. It goes all the way down to those really low frequencies in a perfectly, what sounds to me, linear fashion. So when you hear a kick drum, or even just Eric Clapton thumping his heel on the stage, you feel that bass, not just that main bass note, but you feel all the other bass notes, all the other harmonics that would come with that note, all the way down to 18 hertz, and it's kind of like that hairs on the back of your neck feeling, because now we're getting closer to that, it sounds like real life kind of a sound. Mid-range and treble, obviously two very important factors when listening to hi-fi speaker. The array, the point source array, is definitely noticeable. Having the bass and treble and mid-range all coming from one area, I think it definitely does help with the soundstage. The speakers work together and disappear really, really nicely into the room. The sound stage is far more fleshed out and three-dimensional as a result of it, I believe. By also having 6 2-inch mid-range drivers, compared to what I've listened to in the past, it sounds like the mid-range is really forward and present and three-dimensional and rounded in the room. It doesn't sound like it's just blended in with the others, which I know is something we normally want to happen, but sometimes that can lead to it being lost in the background. The mid-range and treble, for instance, like if we had a main singer at the front of a band playing, that performance is really clearly defined and separated from the background audio. So I really like the treble on it. Obviously the MPD tweeter, I mean, that thing will go to 60 kilohertz all day long. Not that we'd be able to hear it, but it is perfectly smooth, really, really linear, and very tight and clean sounding without being overly harsh on the ears, because there's always a balancing act between making a tweeter that can do really, really crazy things and be really powerful without it fatiguing your ears. With these speakers, what you need to know: they are big speakers. Big speakers do not work well in small rooms. This room that we have here, it's roughly 6 meters wide, and I'd say probably about 10 to 12 meters deep. So it's a pretty big room we have here, and we still had to do acoustic treatment in this room. Big speakers, you need a big room. You probably should be doing some acoustic treatment. At the very least, you should be doing bass traps. And obviously with big speakers, you need big power. Like I said, this is an Accuphase P7500. I think it's rated for 300 or 400 watts per channel, depending on the impedance you're running on your speakers. This amplifier does a good job with them, but my only caveat would be, if you're considering these speakers, make sure you've got a big amplifier or a big pair of mono blocks or something like that. They are absolutely fantastic speakers. If I had to put them into a word, obviously the word would be good. They are very good speakers. They're very fast, great bass, very natural and fast mid-range and treble. I have no complaints about them. Actually, probably the one thing, not a complaint, but the one thing that I often say to people when they come in and I ask for their first impressions on them, usually just on like how they look and that sort of thing, because it is a very unique look. It's been very positive reviews so far on how they look, and I think the reason for it is that they look smaller than they are. That slot that goes up and down the middle that defines the two separate cabinets, by being able to see through them, I think provides a bit of a natural optical illusion and makes the speaker look smaller than it is, because compared to other speakers that I've heard that put out the same amount of sound and amount of bass as what they do, those other speakers have always been like significantly larger looking or larger speakers than these. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're not small, they're physically bigger than I am, but on the face of them, they actually look kind of small and subtle. So I think that Montoya have done a really good job with designing a powerful speaker in what looks to be a very small package. Finishes, so obviously we already talked about the white. They do two other finishes. A matte black, which looks really cool. It's got like gold accents and that sort of thing on it. And a traditional English racing green, which also I think looks really, really cool. Probably will require the right kind of environment for them to go in and look right in place, but still a really, really nice color. And that about does it, guys. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about them, drop them down in the comments and we'll do our best to answer them. And I'll catch you in the next video. Ka kite anō.